We're testing your mama's.
Hi, and welcome to the third take of my critical learning task reflection video, hopefully the last one. My apologies in advance for any background noises. We have a bit of a full house here, but I still wanted to do a video to wrap up the critical learning tasks that I did for this because I felt like I learned a lot and I wanted to create a multimodal way to wrap up all that I learned from them and how it helped me in the course. So I just wanted to say that I learned so much information from these learning tasks in so little time. I was thankful that the initial exercise had been to understand maker spaces in a nutshell because I can't be quite in the video. Because I realized that I didn't really fully understand what a makerspace was. Initially, my view of what a makerspace might be was pretty much just a bunch of men working with lasers and power tools, or conversely, it was the junk that my kids brought home from school that I didn't really understand what the learning purpose was. So I didn't really understand where I fit in and how I could use this in the future. So I felt like these tasks helped me to start coming up with ideas of how I could use it for adult learning. And just to start with, this very first task, which I have up here on the screen, was a good way to jump into the makerspace ideas because it was defining it. And when I looked it up, there was so many different definitions. It made me realize that makerspaces could be many different things, and that sort of opened my mind to actually being a person that could be involved in makerspaces and use makerspaces. And so I collected the many words to describe them, and I created this word cloud with lots of different words, and that sort of gave me an idea of just how diverse the understanding of what a makerspace could be. I also always doubted myself as a maker, and this will come up later in several of my provocations and reflections elsewhere in the site, that I never really saw myself as a maker because I didn't really define making as something that I did. But even in this task, I was already looking at how a maker mentality doesn't necessarily mean somebody that just works with technology or works with woodworking. It's somebody with imagination who can collaborate and has perseverance. And then I talked about, is everyone a maker, and how to include people that don't feel like they belong in this community. Finally, I just wanted to mention that in this critical learning task, I also went and tried to find grassroots organizations that I found really interesting that were making maker spaces and were producing things that were for their communities. And I thought, how easy would it be to find a makerspace that was for learners with disabilities? And I actually found that really difficult. And this came up a whole lot in critical learning tasks, and also when I was looking up information later on in the course. And so I feel like I found a gap in the knowledge out there. All right, jumping to critical learning task 2, I just wanted to talk about how I drew so much from these readings. This confirmed why I had this initial signal that I wasn't a maker, or that I didn't feel welcome in makerspaces. These two authors that I read about sort of described how makerspaces actually, even though they say they're inclusive, don't create an inclusive atmosphere and don't create material or spaces that are welcoming to a diverse audience. So these two readings that I did for critical learning task 2 sort of helped me to see that, and then I thought about them again when I was in the Maker Labs in Vancouver and found that they had discovered the same issue, that they weren't welcoming to women, and that they actively worked to counteract this in several ways. They had come up with an innovative idea to include women, and it was quite successful by creating workshops and then using the people who had done the workshops to be mentors to the next group, so that they actually increased their female and non-binary population to almost 50%. It also, having read those readings, when I walked into makerspaces in the next week, or I looked at making activities, it always made me think whether or not these are actually inclusive. So they sort of gave me food for thought for the rest of the week. The next task was probably my favorite task to do. It was a bit of storytelling through game making, and I really enjoyed creating these stories. It sort of inspired my actual goals. If you go and read my goals in the site, I think that I really respect the first people's principles of learning, that learning is embedded in memory, history, and story. And I feel so much more deeply, I think I feel so much more deeply when a lesson includes a story. And this also came up again with the provocation about love, showing the skeletons. It was sort of a bit of a story. It was explaining biases through a story, and I feel like you learn so much more deeply when there is a story involved in learning. So that sort of inspired my goal. My next critical learning task was to create a trailer. Oh, it's got the sound on, so I always keep that off. And this trailer reminded me following making it about the affordability of VR. There's lots of neat things that you can do with virtual reality and augmented reality, but often a barrier is cost. And so so we were sort of reminded of this when we used a very simple way to view a virtual reality atmosphere with the Google Cardboard activity in the class. And that sort of brought up yet another great first people's principle of learning, which is experiential learning, which is so important. I just remember everybody looking into these little cardboard viewers and just we sounded childlike because we were so amazed at things like whales jumping in front of us. It's such a deep way of learning to be learning experientially. And finally, the last critical learning task that I did was to summarize with 2 annotated bibliographies. I thought those were a great way to wrap up the critical learning tasks because they were talking about multiliteracies, which is what I was practicing throughout all of these critical learning tasks. And I was going outside my comfort zone, using all sorts of different technologies, and also it's a great way to finish this reflection in video form. So there we go, those are my reflections for my critical learning tasks. Thanks.